Good afternoon and welcome to the last OR Today webinar of 2019. We're excited to have over 330 registered attendees for today's webinar. I want to remind you today's webinar is eligible for one continuing education hour, and the post-webinar survey and certificate process is now automated, so the survey link will be included in the follow-up email, which you'll receive in about an hour after this webinar has finished. Once you've completed the survey, you'll be able to download your certificate immediately, and one lucky attendee will win an Amazon gift card for completing the survey. This webinar is also eligible for one credit for eSham and CBSPD, and a separate email containing a link for this credit will be sent out by today's sponsor, Healthmark, during the next few days. Okay, let's kick off today's webinar by giving an OR Today Live surprise pack to the attendee that can tell me the answer to the following trivia question. In Charles Dickens' novel, A Christmas Carol, what was Scrooge's first name? Answer now using the questions feature on your dashboard. While you're answering, just a reminder to save the date for our 7th annual OR Today Live Surgical Conference, which will be taking place August the 16th to the 18th next year at the Omni Interlochen Hotel in Denver, Colorado. Join us to discover new opportunities, broaden your knowledge, and exchange ideas. For more information, visit ortodaylive.com. Okay, and let's see who the winner of our OR Today surprise package is. And it is Janet Bryce there. Congratulations, Janet. The correct answer, of course, is Ebenezer. OR Today would like to thank our sponsor, Healthmark Industries. Since 1969, Healthmark Industries has developed and marketed innovative solutions today to aid healthcare facilities in their delivery of surgical instruments and other life-saving medical devices to patients. Healthmark Industries' mission is to continue to innovate, continue to support and continue to serve the healthcare provider industry and support services that make it possible to deliver quality healthcare. Visit hmark.com for more information. Our presenter today is Jahan Azizi, Special Projects Manager at Healthmark Industries. Jahan, you may begin whenever you're ready.
Okay, thank you, Linda. As Linda mentioned, my name is Jahan Azizi. I'm Special Project Manager for Healthcare Industry, and our topic today is human factors and quality testing for device reprocessing. Just by way of background, I've spent 30 years in healthcare setting investigating and reporting problems with medical devices. My focus has always been on fixing and correcting and then moving on to next. I've also spent several years on the issue of validating and optimizing surgical instrument reprocessing methods. I have worked with device manufacturing and at Food and Drug Administration as well. So I have a little background and knowledge about all aspects of technologies and medical devices. Okay, next slide. Trying to find the next slide and okay. Our objectives are to discuss the device design, FDA clearance versus approval, discuss instruction for use or IFU, labeling and how IFUs are being followed and implemented, outline Food and Drug Administration, Joint Commission, CMS, and legal requirement, and give some examples of patient harm, and highlight device with potential harm and provide examples of the solution. Throughout the presentation, we have 4 polling questions. It will help us to see what's going on in the real world. Just disclosure that I'm employee of Healthmark Industry in Fraser, Michigan. Healthmark manufacture and distribute medical products to healthcare facilities. Of course, there are no compensation has been received for this presentation, and all the opinions of these are mine. The presentation reflects the technique, approaches, and the opinion of myself. This sponsored presentation is not intended to be used as a training guide or promotion. Of course, before using any medical devices, review all relevant packaging, insert, and particular attention to the indication, counterindication, warning, precaution, and the steps to use a medical device. So Healthmark policy is to provide our customers and the healthcare community with the highest quality, state-of-the-art medical product and support services in a timely and cost-effective. This goal is supported by staff committed to individual accountability, professionalism, mutual respect, collaboration, and service excellence. So this presentation basically supports our commitment. Just one more item that Healthmark has been continuous sponsor of Decontamination of the Year Award, which is named after Ann Cofield. The Decontaminator of the Year Award, sponsored by Healthmark, recognizes CSSD of the outstanding paper focusing on understanding and importance of decontamination in their workplace. The recipient of this award is recognized annually at ISHM and receives an engraved plaque plus $1,000 and free registration to ISHM annual meeting. There are also online CU available for free. And then if you need the speakers to come to a local group, organization, association, or even to your medical facility, we are happy to do that. And we are always available for any technical support on our products. So just to start, what is an IFU? And the question is DFU, MIFU are the same as IFU. As we know, just instruction for use is for IFU, direction for use, and manufacturer instruction for use, which is a Canadian use. And yes, these are all the same. And Amy and ANSI SC79 say that IFUs are written recommendation provided by the manufacturer that provide instruction for operation and safe and effective use of its device. Okay, I'm sure you have seen this, but if you haven't, this is you can download it free from FDA website. This guidance provides recommendation for the formulation and scientific validation of reprocessing instrument for reusable medical devices. This guidance document also provides recommendation for control for content review of pre-market submission. So once a manufacturer submit 510K or PMA, FDA staff use this guidance to review their application. I selected this because this has been in work for over 10 years. And as you see from the date that it was issued in 1996, then a draft was in May of 2011, and then the final was released on March 17, 2015, and Appendix E was added to the guidance in June 9 of 2017. Just gonna select a couple paragraph from it to just show you what is in it and if you want to use it. So part of it is design of reusable medical devices. It said that, unquote, manufacturer of reusable devices should consider device design that facilitate easy and effective cleaning, as well as any necessary disinfection or sterilization by the user. And it said that some complex devices design present particular challenges to cleaning and cleaning validation. For example, shaft within the lumen configuration, elevator channels, fine channels, seals, and mated articulation services. From the earliest stage of device design, an engineering manufacturer should consider alternative design to facilitate effective processing. Some replace features that are challenging to reprocess and clean with a single-use device, include flush port, specify and all provide dedicated cleaning and accessories as required. I mean, we're looking at that. We've been purchasing and using medical devices for many decades. Why this is all of a sudden becoming important. One of the things is that most medical devices do not go through a clinical trial. And usually the first sign of a problem or concern may be in clinical setting. So FDA has three categories for medical devices: class 1, class 2, and class 3. And these are based on their risk and the regulatory control necessary to provide a reasonable assurance to the safety and effectiveness. Class 1 devices are generally pose the lowest risk, and class 3 devices pose the highest risk. So if you go on the FDA website, you see about 1,700 various product codes in FDA. And as you look at that, for example, out of all of those, only 10% require clinical trials. Now, about 90% of them do not need clinical trial. And 47% of them are really low-risk device, so they are pre-market exam. For example, class 1 device, stethoscope, or in the case of surgical instrument, surgical retractor kits. There are hundreds of different product codes that they're exempt. They only have to register. And another 43% are shown as similar to other devices in the market. For example, if you have a biopsy forceps that is electric, somebody made it 30 years ago, you can actually get a 510K clearance and utilize that as a predicate device. So let's look at the human factor in that document that FDA sent. FDA to the manufacturer said that we recommend that you, the manufacturer, develop consistent reprocessing instruction across each of your product line. For example, if you have sonication, you require sonication, make sure that at least the time of sonication is similar or identical to all the instruments in the same surgical tray. Furthermore, so that you should address any known post-market human factor issues known to exist for reprocessing your device or similar devices. Examples of human factor issue include, but are not limited to, action requiring substantial dexterity, manual cleaning, strength, good visual acuity, or familiarity with uncommon practice. For devices that are subject to design control of 21 Code Federal Registration, you should validate your reprocessing instruction to ensure that the user will be able to successfully clean that. So basically, the validation of surgical instruments is really responsibility of the manufacturer. So manufacturer is responsible to validate instruments, reliability for clean, sterilization, and disinfection. But users really need to verify cleaning and sterilization equipment that are working all the time and being clean. So going back to the validation on that document, said FDA interpret this regulation to require manufacturers to validate the design, including reprocessing instruction of reusable devices to ensure that the devices can be effectively reprocessed and safely reused over the life of that device. And so that note that exemption from 510K. So those 43% that we said they are exempt, so that does not mean the device is exempt from compliance of labeling, which include the IFU and the quality system when FDA goes to the device manufacturer. So just to highlight what we have in IFU, so that the first one is important, and I will bring some example why it's important. So that a validation study participants should be representative of professional staff that would perform these actual reprocessing procedure. Reprocessing instructions should be comprehensive. The validation should be part of a submission package and will be examined by Food and Drug Administration during the review of that application. All routine cleaning instructions should be included instruction for visual inspection, which may include use of magnification or adequate lighting. And it is important to note that completion of successful cleaning validation alone does not ensure that the device reprocessed by end users are clean. And of course, labeling should include any special warning or precaution about reprocessing procedure when warranted. So I'm going to bring some example of what's going on, just 3 slides to see what's going on, if this is an issue and why we are still going back to it. As we know, ACRI is basically emergency care management. The past 10 years, the issue with cleaning and reprocessing been one of their top 10 and sometimes number 1 and 2. I always say that this is not the top 10 list we want to be on, and we should start removing ourselves from this list, because this is basically shows that hazards that is coming up. And indeed, the top 10 hazards for 2020, next year, number 3 is infection risk from sterile processing error in medical and dental instrument. So we need to really work on to see what can we do, collaboration between manufacturer, FDA, and the hospital and users to see what can we do to get out of this top 10 list. So there's another one that is important to look at that. It said that up to 12,000 children and young adults treated at Seattle Children's Bellevue Clinic and Surgery Center since 2010 could be at risk of infection from surgical instrument that may not have been properly sterilized. And they said that the last was discovered on Thursday, 8/20/2015, when staff examined some instrument that should have been cleaned but had tiny amount of debris on them. And this was evidence that there could be a problem. And they further said that this is the second time in 2 years that Seattle children had alerted a patient about problem with sterilization of surgical instrument. The last one is to just bring up, it said, according to the CDC's guidance for prevention of surgical site infection, said that among surgical patients, surgical infection are the most common hospital-acquired infection, according for 38% of these infections. So that when patient with surgical infection died, 77% of the deaths were reported to be related to the infection, and majority of 93% were serious infection involving organ or spaces accessed during the operation. We know that advances in infection control practice, including improved operating ventilation, sterilization method, barrier, surgical technique, and availability of antibiotic. But despite all these activities, surgical infections remain a substantial cause of morbidity and mortality among hospitalized patients. This I'm looking at that is really a good documentation and a well done job by the hospital. It was in LA time, July 25th on 2017. So that decision followed an 8-week trial. This was the first in the US related to GI scope, causing outbreak of drug-resistant infection. An investigation by federal, state, and county officials concluded that Virginia Mason followed the manufacturer cleaning procedure and the scope was still contaminated after reporting. The jury said that the company failed to provide adequate warning about the scope and instruction for its cleaning, or IFU, after it was manufactured. And they brought an expert, and the expert witness testified that the company would have realized if the scopes were defective if it had sufficiently tested its cleaning and its disinfection process before putting them back in the market in 22. So this was actually a case that the hospital was cleared and the manufacturer was responsible. I was involved in this in 2009, and John Harrison had a surgery to repair his rotator cuff in the right shoulder. This is usually a routine procedure that usually requires overnight stay and followed by some physical therapy. But Harrison was one of the at least 8 patients that had surgery and this shaver was used in. So CDC investigated the issue and pushed it to FDA because obviously medical devices are handled by Food and Drug Administration. And FDA sent this out to say that the FDA has become aware of event in which tissue had remained within certain arthroscopic shaver even after cleaning process was followed. And if you haven't seen a shaver, this is the shaver that was in question in that surgery. And the problem was in this area that was causing the problem, the tissue and bone was staying behind. So that was one way of looking at it. The other one, obviously, if you take a borescope and look at that, you will see that the issues are in these areas. And that was one of the problem that the retained tissue. And he said that obviously the one that it was a striker, but this was really in all the shavers, and moreover, anything really with lumen and cannulated could have retained tissue, because if you cannot see it with naked eye, that doesn't mean it's not there. So due to that issue, manufacturer of the shavers went back and modified their IFU, and they included that they should actually look at recommending that cannulation come in here, look at inside the cannulation, both visual inspection using the scope, both the Stryker and R-Trax included that. So based on that recommendation, if you look at inside the shaver, so these are brand new shaver that was received in January 3rd, and they were pretty clean instruments for most part. So we followed manufacturer recommendation, and 3 weeks later, January 24th, as you see, the clean and then start rusting. These are, we were following the manufacturer recommendation, but we had documentation to go back to the manufacturer and say that is not being clean. So as you go back and you look at them, the area, for example, at the first one that you see, if you look from naked eye, you see some stuff on the bottom, but once you get closer, you can see these photos are from patient-ready shavers that they were ready to be used on patient. They weren't that in the decontam or clean. They were off the sets that we opened the sets in here, as you see, that they were ready for patient use and look inside them. So when you look at that, what's going on, and as you see from this photo, that the person is hidden behind all these instruments. Really, the volume sometimes is amazing that a large hospital could process up to 40,000 surgical instruments daily. And that complexity, volume, and sometimes not being validated is add to the problem. So we went back to the hospital and said, what are some of the problematic instruments? This is a list of items that various person in CSPD mentioned, and most of these are asking why these are problematic. Said because we got called into the operating room to answer to some of the call because the surgeon was not happy or there was an issue with cleaning. I'm looking at that. This is an area that the CSSD technician of the year or anybody else can write a good paper on this, see what's going on, what are the problematic instruments in your institution. For example, one of them that was on the list is the scope, endoscope, ERCP. And this one, if you go by the process, it takes an hour to really go through the whole cleaning process and validation. There are a lot of nooks and crannies in various angles that is really requires some time and areas to clean it. I've seen that usually the video on this on a really nice clean area on the YouTube channel that you can actually watch. It takes about 48 minutes to an hour to process the endoscope. One of the issues that we found out when I was looking at the cleaning recommended by the manufacturer, it said that do a leak test, either dry leak test or in this case, put it in the basin of water and to see if you see bubble. It was interesting that obviously this is a busy area. So what they said that usually that plug in the leak tester and listen for that hiss. We've been looking at some of these leak testers, and the hiss really is not a good way of testing them. This is the same unit. If you look at that, the first one we use with the attachment, the coil tube. And when you do that and you measure actually the output, see how much is put up. So this is about 4 PSI. So now let's attach it and get rid of that coiled wire. Sorry about all the noise, but that's what the CSPDs look like. But if you look at that directly, if you go in, it's about 6 PSI. When you attach that coiled wire, you lose about 2 PSI. So when you have that 2 PSI in that small coil, what would happen if you attach that to a scope? Would you drop more pressure? And would you be able to still detect the leaker? So the poll question number 1 is that, are you verifying the output process pressure of your leak tester using a gauge. There's a question that comes out to see if you are verifying the output pressure of your leak tester using a gauge.
Okay, Johan, I'm going to close the poll now. You have 40% saying yes and 60% saying no.
Okay, great, thank you. So for the 60% that say no, what happens if you don't test that? So these are some of the scope that goes back to the service area. If you don't have a leak tester that put enough pressure in, you could actually flood your scope. And this is one of those scopes that goes to the repair center, and failing the leak was not one of the issue that mentioned. But when they open it, you can actually see that the scope is flooded. Obviously, this is one is the scope get damaged, the other one that the cross-contamination in the patient is going to be an issue. So it's really important to verify your tools that if they're working effectively. Second one is that and the scope channel. So sometimes when you get a scope, do you know what is a good scope? So if you have a brand new endoscope and you look inside it, you see that they're pretty clean area. So this is the articulation area that moved. This is the inside the scope. Is for most part is pretty clean. But then you can go over time and look at that. For example, these are the channel have gouges in them. Then you can actually look over time to see if there's an issue. Knowing that if you have gouge and you could damage the inside the scope, could start leaking inside and compromise the patient. Or for example, in this case, you require some magnification to see some of these issues that here, for example, you see the rust and the damage inside and corrosion inside the scope. These are really interesting. We bought about 200 some suction tips, brand new. And when we looked inside with the boroscope, we saw there was at least 10% of them had issue. For example, these are the items on the thumb hole that, and even this one further, while they were drilling the thumb hole, the drill went too far and put a gouge inside the suction tip. Or this was really interesting because it came in as such with this little metal shaving inside it. So trying to put it through the normal process of cleaning, that little piece did not come out. So we marked it and made sure to put it back in use. What happened, I think when they drilled it, it was hot enough to get the stock to the body of the shavers. So it's important to, when you purchase these instruments, especially the shavers, the $10,000 piece of equipment, to make sure that it is actually a good product. If you don't, over time, you can see that accumulation of debris inside the suction tips. And this was interesting that I used to put some in boroscope inside it, and it still was seeing debris. Cleaned it, soaked it for a long time, and it came back. I could not clean it, and still debris was inside. When I cut it open, as you see that there's some issues. So this was, later on we found out actually this should have been a disposable one-time use, but it looked like the rest of the yank covers, and it was in use for a long time, and it never got cleaned. So these are the issue that we have. So poll question number 2 is that, are you using magnification, boroscope, or check newly purchased instrument during income inspection? This was interesting that because Children's Bellevue Clinic in Seattle said that when the staff examined the instrument that should have been clean but had tiny amount of debris on them. As you know that when a surgeon had a loop in a well-lit operating room, see those tiny things stacked as boulders, which you cannot really see with naked eye. So at least to know what you're sending up is important, to at least look at them under some kind of magnification to see at least what the
Okay.
surgeon sees.
Sorry, Johan, I've closed the poll and you have got 44% said yes and 56% said no.
Yeah, so it is really important to look at magnification. Again, just knowing that when the doctor, surgeon, or clinician looking at those, they look at them in a lighter room. And I know as my eyes are maturing, my reading glasses numbers are going up every day. So it's important to add some magnification and lighted area. Cleaning is not one of the issue. Patients are getting injured by other means. For example, the minimal invasive surgical instruments are growing rapidly. And this one is interesting that FDA put this safety communication on danger of monopolar laparoscopic surgery that poor installation cause harm. Said every 90 minutes, a patient is severely burned and 1 to 2 people die every day from preventable stray energy burn. I will show you a little video clip coming up, but it is really important. And if you want to look at the full FDA press, you can go on FDA website and see the issue. But here's one example, and I will repeat this. And look at this area on the right. So this was caught on camera, basically. I'm going to show the video again and again. Make sure that you pay attention to this corner. So the problem with that is if the patient come back, if you did not know that it was stray capacitor causing the harm, the surgeon really never would look for that part of the body, which was not the intended area of the surgery. So it's important that you use the high pot tester or insulation tester to adequately test the instruments if there's any nicks or item in it. So here's poll question number U3. Are you verifying installation of your instrument using a high pot or high potential or insulation testing? And just to let you know, various installation instruments require various voltage testing. I know being at some of the hospital, they have the instruments, but they only use one voltage setting. So it's important that, for example, insulating shaft or cord may require 4,200 volts or 4.2 kV, while bipolar forceps may use 2,800 volts. Now, some people, they have those insulation testing, but they only set it up, say, as 1,500 volts, which is not sufficient for some of the instruments.
Okay, Johan, I've closed the poll and you have got 55% said yes and 45% said no.
Thank you. So, and obviously, if you look at that, how is that happening? Every 90 minutes, somebody gets zapped. It's because really part of it is the processing. You look at the tray, these are basically, some of these are painted. The insulation are painted and they're really fragile. So as you put them on top of each other, the issue is that the banging on them could cause damage to the instruments. And when you wash them, obviously, it's important that you attach these to various hooks. That way we can clean the inside of them. And some of these items needs to be really open to be able to clean. The other issue that we see is really surgical fire, operating fire. So according to FDA, a surgical fire can occur at any time when 3 specific elements are present. And I'm sure you've seen the triangle, which is oxidizer, such as oxygen or nitrogen, an ignition source, such as electrosurgical unit, electrocautery unit, laser and fiber optic illuminator system, and a fuel source. There's tons of them in the OR, surgical drapes, alcohol-based skin preparation or patient tissues, hair, skin. Those are all items that if you have all these 3 elements together, you could cause a surgical fire. And here's a representation of who manages what. So we know that the surgeon controls the ignition source, the preoperative staff manages the fuel, and the anesthesia provider controls the oxidizer, oxygen and nitrogen. So FDA recommends that the following action to reduce this preventable event: conducting a fire risk assessment prior to each surgical procedure, encouraging communication between the surgical team, there's huddle or timeout, safe use of administration, and we really in this are going to talk about ignition source, so that's safe use of any devices that may serve as an ignition source, and safe use of surgical suit items that may serve as a fuel source. And you need to obviously put a plan together, practice it, and how to manage surgical fire. And the reason being that Joint Commission issue 29 said that while exact numbers are not available, of more than 23 million inpatient surgeries and 27 million outpatient surgery performed each year, this estimate is based on data from FDA and ACRI. So indicate that there are approximately 100, and I've seen some number as 300 surgical fire each year, which result in 20 serious injuries and 1 or 2 patient deaths annually. So it's based on that triangle, this was a study that we did at one of the hospital. So when you have open oxygen, some of the case that you require open oxygen, the oxygen, it doesn't dissipate really quick. So the oxygen concentration, if you start from 100% oxygen, and then you kind of put this under the drape, under the table, under areas that there's no movement of air, the oxygen dissipation takes a long time to get to the room oxygen, which is 21%. So in this case, could take up to 180 seconds, 3 minutes to go below level. We know that the oxygen are really flammable above 30% oxygen concentration. So as you see, it takes at least up to 100 seconds for something under the drape to dissipate. And we know that the oxygen is heavy and just doormat and is ready to be ignited. So here's a monopolar cord. I'm sure you have had similar issue in the past that it comes out with contact. So we have a couple of these that we received photos, and you see that this is, as here, you see that melted. And if this happens in an area that you have high oxygen concentration, about 30%, could be really dangerous to the area. So I have another questions coming up, poll question, said, are you using an ohm meter to verify continuity of your bipolar and monopolar cord?
Okay, Jahan, I'm now going to close the poll. So you have 26% said yes and 74% said no.
Wow, okay. So why do we need to do them? So this is from IFU, and all the IFU for reusable cords, monopolar or bipolar, said that it is recommended to establish a procedural review by which the cord's electrical continuity is regularly tested with an ohm meter, as well as frequent inspection of the cord installation. And this is interesting, from frequent to say that before and after each use. This is actually directly from the IFU. And check for crack, nicks, laceration, or abrasion, and by which a criteria is set for the discarding and replacement of these cords, which may be worn and hazardous to the patient and operating room. Since they were really kind enough, they put a warning in the IFU, and it said that using a cord which is damaged, worn, or until its inevitable failure, it is possible that it will overheat and either ignite itself or ignite nearby material, and is inherently dangerous to both the patient and the operating room personnel. This is a point that is not just for the patients. Actually, when we have surgical fire, the staff could be part of the damage. So the IFU said that is potential, but if you go to FDA website and look at the recalls, I just went up and looked at recall, which this happened recently, recall number Z1952-2018, which may happen in 2018 and was recall number 1952 reported to FDA. So that there was one that there's a potential for the cord to spark and cause fire. And then if you look at MOD database, I'm not if you're familiar with MOD, but it stands for Manufacturer and User Facility Device Experience. Is basically a database houses medical device reports submitted to the FDA by mandatory report in case it was death or serious injury, or by manufacturer that is supposed to voluntarily report to FDA. So in one of those MOD, it said that during laparoscopic colostomy, the bovie was not working well. And obviously the surgeon said that increase the power. So the power was increased from 35 to 40 joules. Spark came from the cord where it was attached to the machine. The cord separated, similar to the photo that I'll show you from the hub, at the connection and fell to the floor. The plug remained in the machine. The end of plug was red hot, and the end of cord was red hot as well, and smoldering. The bovie machine was checked okay, and there was no problem found. So this is not a matter of if, it's just when, and do you want to be one of those 100 or 300 hospitals that do that? And is it required that you have to test the continuity of all these devices? So to sum it up, is that on the human factor issue, that we need to understand how people interact with technology and studying how user interface design affect the interaction between the people and technology. This is basically called human factor engineering or usability engineering. Human factor engineering usability engineering consideration is the development of medical devices involved in three major components of the device system. Is device users, device environment, and device interface. So those are the really three important parts of when you design medical devices. And as we saw from FDA recommendation for the cleaning, it said that we recommend that you develop consistent reprocessing instruction across each of your product line. You should address any known post-market human factor issues known to exist for reprocessing your devices or similar devices, and validate your reprocessing instruction to ensure that the user will be able to successfully understand and follow them. I think the important part is that, especially with the item number 2, the post-market surveillance is really something that the user need to feed back to FDA, and that require collaboration between the device manufacturer, the hospital users, and going back to FDA to be able, we all could resolve some of the issue. There are a lot of resources related to human factor standard that AMI and FDA has. If you type in the human factor issue, you get a lot of data that you can look into it. So with that, I will open it up to the questions. Any questions?
Okay, great. Thank you, Jehan. Yes, we've got a couple of questions. The first one is, should the manufacturer validate cleaning process in hospital setting for all types of surgical instruments?
Sure, thank you. So on that one, it's really interesting. When we're looking at that photos with a person with all the instruments in the background, as I said, up to 40,000 various instruments we clean on every day. And you look at some of the validation is usually done in the laboratory. And that's really a requirement. So when you do validation, manufacturer sometimes hire a third party and validate their devices. But real use is obviously with real patient. That's the important part, to get the tissues and bones and what have you. And the time sometimes take between coming from the surgery to the clean area. But more important is the time of the day. I mean, when somebody brings a loaner tray at 2 p.m. and said that we need this for the next case, and you have hundreds of other instruments, just the human factor and the person that cleaned that instrument should really have some input and at least try to see if these are cleanable. So that's really the important. Yes, I believe that at least for the complex and complicated one, they should be validated in the clinical setting, which they are not required to do now.
Okay. How would manufacturers address post-market human factors issues related to cleanabilities?
So this has been a little slower process than we like to do that. if you go back to that arthroscopic shaver that happened in 2009, and I was looking at some modification that they did. Obviously, they came back 2 years later, said that you need to take some kind of borescope or magnification to look inside, to look for those tissues remain inside the shavers. But I haven't really seen a huge improvement on the design of these. As I said, this is 10 years later and still we have some of the similar issue. But they should go back and to see, yes, they designed it with third party in mind, but when they put it back in the hospital, they find out it's not being cleaned. So they need to go back, work with the users and try to find a solution. And on the other hand is that at the end of the day, we all are part of this system as a user facility. What can we do to feed back those improvement that we see to the manufacturer? Hopefully they can incorporate it in their future design. So one, can they clean it by adding more brush? For example, again, going back to that shaver, they used to have one brush to clean all the areas. Now, as part of that process is 3 brushes. Is it effective yet? It has some improvement, but still more could be done for cleaning those shavers.
Okay. Another question that's coming is, what are the recommendations for cleaning the actual boroscope to validate cleaning of the scopes in other instruments?
So boroscopes, most of them that actually can be processed. So obviously it's a really good tool because you can go to see the areas that is not visible with naked eye, but good boroscope should be able to be processed and cleaned for the next instrument. And hopefully most of them are used on the clean side, that you can wipe them down with some cleaning agent on the clean side.
Okay, and another question here is, should the handles of the endoscopic devices be evaluated? Insulation testing in brackets.
So yes, obviously that, as you saw, that we have issues every 90 minutes that we injure somebody, but they really should be look at all the aspect of either the areas that contact the body or the source of energies that encompass the laparoscopic instrument. As you see that more and more of minimal invasive instruments are coming into that, and the installation, especially if it's painted, some of those damages are not visible to naked eye, and you really need to run appropriate energy. As I said, some of them takes 4,200 volts to be able to detect those small nicks and crannies, to be able to validate if they are, or verify if they're still good to be used.
Okay, that's great. We don't appear to have any more questions, so we are coming up to our hour. So thank you, Jahan, for a great and informative webinar, and obviously thank you again to our sponsor, Healthmark Industries. Just another quick reminder that the post-webinar survey and certificate process is now automated, so the survey link will be included in the follow-up email, which you'll receive in about an hour's time. If you have any questions, please contact us at webinar@mdpublishing.com, and for more information on our upcoming OR Today webinars, please visit our website ortoday.com. I'd like to thank you all for your continued support for supporting OR Today webinars for this year. So happy holidays from all of us at OR Today. Thank you for joining us again, and enjoy the rest of your day, and we hope to see you in 2020.
Thank you. Thanks.